friends, it's Teresa and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I am going to be talking about a book I don't even have in my hands yet. I am going to be talking about a book that I read in October, which I think is also part of my 5-star predictions list. Also part of my 5-star predictions list, and that is Vampires of El Norte by Isabel Cañas. This is an adult historical fiction novel, and I have a lot of things to say. If you like these kind of videos from me, like more reviews and stuff, let me know in the comments down below. Or if you want to see more content from me, hit like, subscribe, and we can check in again next week. But let's just kind of get into the video. Let me start off with the synopsis of this book. Like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, Vampires of El Norte is a historical fiction novel following two perspectives, Nena and Nestor, who are like childhood friends to somewhat lovers. That is until when they were about like 13 or 14, they are attacked by the thing that kind of creeps around and lurks in the shadows at night. Fearing that Nena has died, Nestor flees the only home he's ever known and kind of becomes a vaquero throughout the lands close to them. 9 years later, Nestor returns to his home ranch due to the Mexican-American War in 1840, only to see that Nena is alive and well. The two of them, with Nestor trying to really grapple with the fact that he's been basically living a lie these past 9 years, while Nena's trying to grapple with the fact of being more than just a body for her parents to sell to the next and strongest ranch. The two of them are now trapped in an impossible situation where they have to trust each other and try to survive through the night after they have to run from the war zone because of these creatures that are attacking, and they have to survive the night and find their way back to home, to where home is. Obviously, trigger warnings. Let me just pull that list up for all of y'all. Classism, blood and gore, gun violence, war, and death. I guess you could almost say like murder in a sense, but mainly death. Moving on to my first thoughts of this, I saw this on TikTok. Someone was recommending like books you might enjoy if you are trying to get in historical fiction. To me, this read as a little bit more of a horror, so I was definitely up for it. I like reading horror. I'm definitely in a bit of a horror kick, so I was super excited. I love reading vampires, and I just love this like friends to lovers, like enchant almost romance kind of situation happening. So I was very stoked for it, and I heard really good things that I've seen other people talking about it on TikTok. Now I know we don't always trust TikTok for the book recommendations, but I feel like since this was so out of the norm for the things I typically see on TikTok, that I had to. So I was super stoked in October, which is the perfect month to do it. Moving on to my thoughts, I'm going to start off with the things I thought were pretty strong in the book, all the way down to the things that I felt like were just kind of lacking, and how whichever one is at the kind of at the bottom of that pyramid, or the lacking part, how it could have like flushed it out to make it just a little more fleshed out. A little more rounded out, I should say, is the better term. The strongest bit of this book was definitely the characters. It's a very character-driven book, I would say. So if you're not into character-driven books or you struggle with those, this might be a struggle for you, as you can really sit down and read a book and enjoy it. I loved reading through Nena and Nestor's point of views. I felt like that Nena's rage was very palpable. I loved really seeing her struggle to prove herself to her father and still feel like she's coming up short because she's still held back by this anger that she feels toward Nestor and just him abandoning her when they had made so many plans for themselves throughout the years. I really enjoyed Nestor's grief. I felt like his grief was palpable off the screen, and obviously it's very understandable why he did the things that he did when it happened. There were so many things happening, and that as like a young kid you can't really understand it, so you do what a kid does and react instead of sitting down and thinking. I really love seeing their characters. I love seeing them kind of come back together and see that they're like, they haven't missed a beat almost. Like there's still something missing. Obviously there's been 9 years, almost a decade of a gap between them, but they do fall back into patterns and they fall back into themselves like an old habit, and I really love seeing that on the page. I just felt like these two characters were such a strong piece to this novel, and I don't think the novel I would have rated this novel as high as I did had these two characters not been the focal point of the story, because they definitely make or break the story for sure. Moving on to the writing was definitely gorgeous. I found myself getting really just lost in the words that Isabel Cañas wrote. It's a very quick and easy thing to get through. There isn't a ton of like world building. Obviously it's historical fiction, and I liked the kind of weaving of like the Mexican folklore inside the novel to round out the vampires. I feel like that the writing really set the tone and the atmosphere for the novel, and without the writing, this book would have been very, very different. If this had, I think, been written by a different author, the atmosphere and tone would be very different from what I was reading. I feel like we got a lot from the writing, and it really set the tone, set the atmosphere, created a setting for you to be able to picture. And while there wasn't a ton for you to really picture, it's the middle of the desert, more or less, it still painted a picture for you to kind of understand where the characters are and where this time frame is and how it affects everyone in it. And then moving on to the themes, I think the themes were another big portion of this book. Obviously, the vampires in El Norte aren't just the vampires that like pin you to the ground and suck your blood and kill you. There were a lot of themes of colonialism and imperialism in this novel. A lot of it, I think, really lent itself to the fact that the vampires were kind of a double entendre, both in the physical sense, they were actually vampires there, and then there were also the Anglos, the white people, who were the vampires leeching off the land and leeching off the people for their own personal gain. Obviously such a very strong point in this novel. I also thought that the discussions about classism within this time frame were also very strong. We see Nestor really struggle with the fact that he is of a lower class while Nena is the daughter of the head of the ranch. There's some expectations that she will get married to another son of the ranch to help strengthen the ties between the ranches. And Nestor, who is like striving to gain his way, to get approval, to rise through the ranks, just isn't hitting the mark. And it's later revealed that no matter what Nestor could have done, he would have never gotten approval from Nena's family because he was such a lower class, and what could he offer to the ranch as someone who is so low born. And I really enjoyed those discussions of classism in the novel, or I guess like enjoyed. It was nice. It was a piece of media I enjoyed and liked to analyze. But I think the themes were definitely a big part of this book, and I think definitely, again, are one of those things that, like, without the themes of this novel, this book wouldn't have been as good, or as I wouldn't have rated it as high as I would have had it not been done this way. Moving on to the one of the two things that I feel like the book kind of fell flat with, one of them being the pacing. I enjoyed it. It's definitely, like I said, a more character-driven book, so the plot was a lot slower. We spent a lot of time in Nestor and Nena's heads, just really understanding them as characters and understanding their motivations, what makes them tick, why are they the way that they are, what they need to do to be able to grow as characters and all that stuff. So it's definitely more character driven, but I feel like, again, the pacing did fall a little flat for me. I was expecting a little bit more of a build up. Obviously the entire story is them trying to come back together as like a team to be able to defeat the vampires that are hurting their land and hurting their people. There was a huge build up, lots of build up, but I feel like the final like fight scene just kind of fell flat for me, if that makes sense. It definitely felt like there was a lot of build up, and the big reveal as to what was going on, while it was impactful, was so easily very much glossed over because it happened so quickly and without much build up. So we get a huge build up to the final fight scene between the vampires, the Anglos, and Nena and Nestor and their ranch. But we find the twist that I think needed to be at the build up for the proper payoff happening several pages beforehand. And I feel like that gap between the two just kind of made that payoff feel a little flat. And to boot, I feel like it, what's the word I'm looking for? The reveal didn't feel as like in your face, or like, oh my god, that makes sense. How do we not see it? Because there wasn't build up, one, to the reveal, and then two, there was again that huge gap between the actual reveal and then the fight that took place. I think had we spent some more time building up and hinting to what was actually going on, and then the reveal happening within the same pages as the final like showdown, it probably would have felt, the pacing would have felt more like dynamic to me, and it would have been a better payoff come the final bit of the book. That's just kind of where I think it fell flat. I think in order to strengthen that a bit, I think the bits, obviously this entire book is just a big will they or won't they. I think the parts that I wanted, I feel like they should have shortened the parts of Nena and Nestor giving us the will they or won't they, because it was just a lot of repetitiveness throughout the part where they're traveling in the night and trying to make it to day. But if had those moments been shortened, or maybe some parts were just cut out, and we got to see Nena and Nestor maybe watch the Anglos from afar, or like figure things out on their own, like maybe an Anglo had been following them, and at the same time vampires appeared wherever they went, and they made those connections that the Anglos had been using the vampires to kill the people to make it easier for them, then I think it would have been, the pacing would have been saved a little bit more that way. And finally, the weakest part of this book were the monsters for me. Obviously, given the fact that the themes are there and the things that I've told you about, the real monster, the real vampires of El Norte were the Anglos, the ones who were coming in with this imperialistic mindset that they were going to take over, and that the land already belonged to them, despite there being many ranches and many people who have lived on this land longer than these people have been alive. But the monsters itself felt a little flat, and I think that happened again because of the pacing. I was expecting there to be like a 28 days later kind of scenario where there are just vampires left and right, and then Nestor don't really know where to make heads or tails of this or how to figure out the pieces. But we got a couple of scenes with the vampires where they figure out how to kill them, and a couple of scenes where Nena learns that she can kind of talk to them because she has been bitten by them. Still would have liked to see that described, but I would have liked to have seen kind of like a mixing of sorts, you know, like one of two things, where, because right now the Anglos and the vampires are completely different entities. We learned that the Anglos are like manipulating them and like torturing the vampires to become bloodthirsty and attack whenever they see people. But they don't want to do that. They just want to live peacefully, maybe eat a goat or two. But because they're so separate from each other, I feel like it kind of weakens the themes of the book a little bit, and weakens what the real like big bad monster is of the novel. I think, personally, for me, what I would have done was either the Anglos used the vampires to turn other people, the people that they were like colonizing, into vampires to use against them, which could have been a double way of like talking about colonialism and how that affects the people around them, and like obviously the lasting effects of colonialism and like the negative impact that it has on the people. I'm like, it's a long-winded thing, but like just that kind of internalized thing where like, oh no, the white people are better than us and we're lowly kind of mentality. Or the Anglos thinking that they could rule everything and everyone, start turning bits of their men, thinking that they were better and they could handle this transformation because they were just made that way, to slowly become monsters. Kind of like in Howl's Moving Castle, where the wizards were manipulated to turn into monsters and they could no longer turn back into monsters way too late in the game. When they had lost themselves to this power-hungry kind of mess that they're in. I think that would have melded the two concepts of a monster together, and would have made like the larger monster, like colonialism and greed and hunger for power, and it would have just made that monster stronger. Because how do you fight against like capitalism? How do you fight against colonialism? Or this concept that like you are stronger and better and you can survive this and become even stronger and better, you know? Is that making sense? Is that making sense? Having the Anglos torture the vampires made sense to make them the true monsters, but because the Anglos were so separated from what was considered to be the big bad in the beginning, it was hard to kind of marry the two together. And by then, they didn't have a face. You know, like they were just kind of faceless soldiers doing what they were told, and it just kind of took away from that shock and that scary value by not putting a face to it. But I think that's just me. Overall, I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. Again, super easy read. I love reading about Nestor and Nena, and they're trying to become who they're meant to be and who they want to be in this life. But I feel like the monsters and the pacing kind of definitely made it difficult for me to give it the full 5. By the time I was done with the book, I was just kind of left feeling there was a big gap missing in my reading, and I wanted there to be more, or I wanted some certain like things to be a little bit more developed. But I enjoyed it, and I'll definitely be picking up Isabel Cañas's next debut novel, The Hacienda. Super excited to start that and read it. But that is it for my review of Vampires of El Norte by Isabel Cañas. If you enjoyed this novel, let me know in the comments down below. If you want to talk more about it, let me know down there too. But until next time, I'll see you guys in my next video, and stay safe. Bye.